Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Representation in Games panel. We have 5 panelists tonight. I'm going to start off by introducing myself. My name is Dr. Dave Eng, and I'm also going to go down the list. So, Jessica, can you please introduce yourself?
Hey folks, I'm Jessica Korean, and I am a game designer and game design professor, and I also work in the immersive theater world.
Thank you, Jessica. Tony, can you please introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Tony. I'm a game designer and I run Game Makers Guild Nashville.
Excellent. Dana, can you please introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Dana Ware, and I'm a creative designer, and I specialize in virtual reality.
Awesome. And Jason, can you please introduce yourself?
Hey, I'm Jason Serrato. I am a filmmaker and game designer.
Awesome. Thank you, Jason. So I'll start us off with this panel. My name is Dr. Dave Eng. I am the managing partner and also game designer at University XP, where I talk about and write about games and game design. And I also teach at New York University School of Professional Studies. So our topic for this panel is representation in games. And one of the first areas I want to talk about is where I see representation in games. One of the first areas is kind of like a historical overview, which is that when people think about representation, they often think about just gender diversity with men and women, who plays games, who designs games, and who is involved in the community. While gender diversity is important, it's not one of the only things to think about. And the rest of our panelists tonight are going to be able to talk more in depth about that. But the thing I want to touch upon, and the reason why this panel came together, is the more diverse representation of gamers overall in the market. Games have always been a very diverse field. However, for a lot of people, we haven't always seen that. And that's one of the things that I'd like to call upon in this particular panel, which is the fact that gamers are very diverse, and so are the people that make games. One of the things that I think is particularly representative right now in games is in tabletop games, because I play tabletop games, I also design tabletop games. And one of them that I think has been a really great example has been the tabletop game Fog of Love. If you've never played Fog of Love before, it's a two-player cooperative game in which each player represents one person in a relationship, and their goal is to help this relationship grow and flourish based on the needs of their partner. And while one of the box covers for Fog of Love is a traditional heterosexual couple, there are alternative art covers for it in which there are two men or two women on the cover. And I think that just goes on to show that relationships between two people are more diverse than just traditional heterosexual couples. And the game Fog of Love goes that extra step in identifying that, particularly in its box art. Another good representation is in One Deck Dungeon, the tabletop game. And what I think is particularly representative here is the fact that while One Deck Dungeon has a lot of traditional role-playing game characters like a barbarian or a rogue or a wizard or anything else, all of those characters are female in this game, in which case the designer and the illustrator had taken that specific direction in choosing female characters to represent in this environment, which I thought was a great step forward, making sure that these traditional characters, which may have just been represented as male, are not in this game. Instead, they are all female characters that still fit the role of One Deck Dungeon. Another area that I think representation deserves further examination is in rule books. If you look at a lot of tabletop game rule books, the pronouns that are usually used sometimes are very masculine, and sometimes some of those pronouns that are used are feminine. But I think that in order to be most inclusive as possible, one of the best things that we can do is use gender neutral pronouns, specifically they and them. While it may not seem like a big critical decision at the very beginning, particularly as you're writing your rulebook, it goes much further in acknowledging that all gamers can be included, particularly when you're explaining the rules for your tabletop game. And one of the last things I want to talk about from my particular content is the fact that all of these decisions that we make as gamers, as community members, as designers, is important because all of this affects the player experience. For us as designers, for you as gamers, and for basically everyone in the community. Our player experience is very much influenced by who we play with and the games that we play with each other. So that is me. I'm going to now throw to my colleague, Jessica Crean. Jessica, take it away.
Hey folks, again, my name is Jessica, and I'm the founder and CEO of I Can't Go On Games and Immersive Experiences. So I wanted to touch a little bit tonight on why it is that representation is important and how tricky it is to get right sometimes. it's very possible that you are watching this talk because you have yourself been at times stuck between a rock and a hard place. You are born this one thing. You go through your whole life playing this role and being this one kind of person or multiple kinds of people that develop over time, and we put so much energy into who we are and how we grow. And then when we enter into a game space, we have entered essentially this training ground to be someone else and to make decisions that are very different than ours. And there are a lot of games that guide us in really healthy and exciting ways to do that. And there are others that just kind of drop kick us into another world and say, good luck, you're somebody else now. And a lot of games do this and it doesn't matter. Or it matters a little bit, or we're just starting to realize that in fact things mattered that we didn't think mattered. We used to teach our whole intro class at, I teach at Drexel University, and we used to teach an imperialist game essentially as one of the first games that students come across. And just this year, all of a sudden there's this question of, oh, should we really be doing that? And the answer of course is no. We should not actually be introducing our students to games using a game that implies imperialist or has direct imperialist structures. But these things are so baked into the world that we live in that it can be hard to see them sometimes, let alone correct them. So all of that is a long-winded way of saying that whatever brought you here, whatever aspect of representation you are looking to like really shine a light on, you are very welcome here, and you are not alone in this exploration. We are all figuring out so many things together. The industry is really having this coming of age moment. So it's great that we can be a part of that movement together. Anyway, on to some more specifics. So there are many kinds of representation in games, and I want to start with the self, because we start there so often. And so we bring so much to games just by being who we are, that sometimes it's hard to forget that often when we enter into game spaces, what we really need to do is de-roll or de-layer ourselves just a little bit. And it's impossible to really get rid of any or all of the biases that we've accumulated over the course of our lives, for better and many for worse. But what we can do is shine a light on it, to say, I'm coming here to this game, this is what I'm bringing to it, and these are potentially some of the obstacles that I'm going to experience when I try to take on this particular role. I still remember going to a job interview a couple of years ago and having someone who was interviewing me for a game design position tell me that he played D&D regularly. We were bonding over D&D, as gamers do. And he said that the only reason that he understood the female experience was because he always played female characters when playing D&D. And I had this moment of, do I get up and walk out of the room now? This is not going to be a good fit. Or do I have a conversation about this? Or do I let this go? How do I handle this moment when I am in a position of being a subordinate to power? I am asking for a job, and yet here I am looking at this person who is in power, talking authoritatively about the female experience. And sometimes it's much subtler than this. But I note this one because I think the intentions were good. We enter into game spaces to become somebody else. And so this line between who we are and what we bring to an experience is a very fine line versus what we enter into. So as game designers, as Dave was mentioning before, how we're laying out the instructions matters. What we first see when we look at a box matters. All of these things bring these feelings up inside of us. So if it ever feels too small, what you are looking at in terms of representation, when it comes to our individual selves and how we relate to the characters and the roles that we play, nothing is too small. It all matters deeply. So this brings me to the next kind of representation that we look at, which is that of the other. We bring things to the game, and the game brings things to us. And so we get to make these conscious choices. In video games, we see, this movement towards having different kinds of different skins. So you can really choose who you look like as a player. And lots of players will note that they play differently based on what they look like, or it feels different to walk into a game and see that everyone looks completely different than humans and everyone is sort of on par in that sense. Or you can come in and play someone who looks like you. It feels really good. I'm all about the anecdotals today, so I was watching this video. This is not game related, sorry everyone, but it still matters. I was watching a video of a little girl watching Hamilton and watching representation within Hamilton and seeing that one of the leads in the play looked like her. And there she was just saying, that's me, mommy, that's me, mommy. So even from a very young age, kids know when they are being portrayed enough or not enough or in really positive lights. And so these things get really, again, baked into who we are and how we play. So we're really looking at a pretty strong restructuring potentially of representation in games nowadays. Okay, and last but not least, I want to talk a little bit about the industry because it is a tricky place to feel accepted for a lot of people. I have almost quit games twice. And I've only really been an active part of the games industry for about 3 years. And to have 2 crises of faith in just 3 years, I will say it's not uncommon if you are facing any kind of gatekeeping within the industry. And so there are very few people to turn to if you find yourself feeling alone. And again, it's sort of this multi-step process of, first you have to recognize that you feel alone. And if you're entering into a new industry, you sometimes don't know quite what the industry feels like. So it's hard to get a sense of who you are within it, who everyone else is, again, that dichotomy between self and other, and then what is the industry doing at large. And so while the industry is making a lot of changes right now, it's still good to just note who's out there making waves, who might be a good resource for you. And I will say again that like a lot of people are tired. If there are people who are in the industry who are minority representing humans, then it can get a little bit exhausting trying to, hold up this weight within the industry of like being the best possible person, and also just creating space for new designers to come and ask for help. But they are out there. So there are people in the industry who are gatekeepers who really want to help designers, and then there are others who hold on to power for dear life. And so this is just to say that there's always going to be a mix, but if you're hitting a lot of gatekeepers or a lot of people who are saying no, there are others out there who want to help and who can help guide you in this like very nuanced navigation of what it's like to actually get games published and be a part of the industry. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Jessica. So up next is our other colleague, Dana Ware. Dana, take it away.
Thanks. So my name is Dana Ware. I am a VR specialist. I'm a creative designer, and I work at The Void, which is a location-based VR company. And I also teach and have taught some college classes as well. So today I'm going to be talking about empathy and representation in virtual reality specifically. So VR has a very special kind of history, one that has been around for a while, but then also had like a rebirth recently. And there has been a term coined that VR is the ultimate empathy machine. And this term was coined by Chris Melk in his 2015 TED Talk, when he basically said that virtual reality has the ability to connect humans to other humans in a profound way. And he was specifically talking about 360 film in general, but I think that this really applies to games and virtual reality, 3D modeled virtual reality in games, and why it's important and how we can actually create compassion, empathetic, and connected experiences for our players. And so what actually ends up happening is us as designers have an opportunity to really create environments that are diverse and authentic experiences. And we have to be sensitive to what that is and what that means. Because in the virtual reality space, there's actually a new relationship that's formed between the player and the virtual environment. And this relationship is formed due to presence. There's a newfound ability to establish presence within this HMD that we are asking our users to put on and be a part of. So because of that presence and due to that presence, there's actually an opportunity for these players to become very vulnerable in this state, because we as designers get to kind of mess with their senses. We get to mess with the way that they feel emotionally, but also physically within this space due to this virtual HMD apparatus that we are asking them to put on. And because of that, we get to ask them to do physical actions that may be different than something that they are comfortable with. We are asking them to physically gaze around the environment and have their own control over that gaze, and to have their own unique experience within this virtual environment. And so you might throw a whole group of people into a virtual reality experience together at the same time, and they're all going to come out with different experiences. They're all going to come out with different feelings from that time that they spent in the virtual space. So it's really important for us as creators to recognize our responsibility in how we represent gender, race, and cultures within that virtual space. because this might be the first time and the only time that this player is going into a space where they might be in a new represented version of a new culture or a represented version of a different country. And they are relying on us to give them an authentic experience within that space. And so what ends up happening is when presence is increased within the virtual space, there's actually been studies that have found that empathy also increases as well. So they kind of come up together at the same time, which is really important. And there was a study that was done at Stanford University when they created a virtual experience called Becoming Homeless. And it was just that. It was an experience of a person becoming homeless. And they had two different groups. There was a group of people who went through the virtual reality experience, and there was a group of people who didn't. But they were both asked to sign a petition to help with the Affordable Act, the Affordable Housing Act. And what they found was that people who went through the VR experience actually became more empathetic and willing to sign this petition that was in front of them. And so we as designers recognize and see that as an opportunity to actually build these empathetic experiences for people. Go ahead. Thanks. And so we have to kind of take a step back as developers and recognize our own biases when it comes to creating these experiences and see what it is that we're putting into our designs, and are these designs bringing a bias for our interactions with certain types of characters or mechanics within that space, and the art form that we use as well. How are we representing a certain culture or a certain individual with our art style? And also, of course, like the story, and how is that story representing that specific group of people that we are now putting into this environment? And I think the way that we really come at that is by trying to be as diverse with the voices at the table as we can, making a space for everyone to be included, and to make sure that if there is some type of misinformation or stereotype that is being designed into our experiences and our products, that somebody has the opportunity and feels safe enough to say something, that they have a place and can be heard and feel respected enough to be heard, to call it out when they see it, essentially. So I actually run a group in Utah that is, it's a group for Latinx artists. And one of the things that comes up very often in our conversations is how people just don't feel supported. And whether that is a financial support, or that's a support by having encouragement that people actually do care about their stories and do care about their experiences, they feel discouraged a lot of the time because they don't see those opportunities available to them. And so I think what we have to do is constantly remind ourselves as people that come from minority groups that our stories matter, our experiences matter, and our voices matter, and people deserve to hear them. And so we have to just keep pushing to try to get them out there and try to get them shown and made and created and into the public as much as we possibly can, even though we know that there is going to be possibly some discouragement along the way, is to just keep supporting each other in our efforts. Right now is a very unique time where everyone is kind of seeking out these authentic stories. They want to have experiences and stories that are real. They're coming and they're searching for that content. And so it's an important time for companies to kind of take a really, really good, strong look at their teams and notice whether or not it's a diverse team. Are these people who are creating these experiences, are they coming from diverse point of views and backgrounds? And is that space there for them? Is there a space for people of color? Is there a space for people of the LGBT LGBTQ plus community. Are we making there a safe space for people to be able to participate and say something and not feel like there's going to be a negative repercussion because they said something, because they spoke up? I think I have a lot of companies that come to me and will ask me about how they can help with the representation of Latinx within their organization, how they can help support. And I think that that's one of the most important parts, is just to make sure that people feel safe, that they're wanted and that they're needed and their voices are important. And I think that these conversations are this is the first step to getting to that process. Having these conversations, being willing to talk about what it takes to make those changes within the industry, within the stories, and within the work that we're doing. And I'm really excited about virtual reality specifically, and I love working in it because of the fact that it does have this ability to create these empathetic experiences. And it's so unique as a form of media that we really can create something that's pushing boundaries and that can innovate not only on the technological side, but also innovate with story and design as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Dana. I appreciate it. Up next, we have our colleague, Tony Tran. Tony, take it away.
Hi, my name is Tony. I'm a tabletop game designer, and I run Game Makers Guild Nashville. And I want to talk about visual and mechanical representation in games, which is a little bit different than how we know what we're talking about today. The first thing I want to talk about is characters. I know Dave touched on it a little bit, but games and other media should be broad and diverse as well. When games talk about more serious topics, it causes people to look at games more seriously. We always play like these silly, there's like all these silly games we play, but there are now more serious games out there. Themes and settings also have the same effect. I'm personally starting to see but a slower shift of theme rather than topics. It's just an exciting time for as a game designer who works in the space. This picture is from GDC talk from 2019 from Nick Yee, and I really love this talk. It's called A Deep Dive into the 12 Motivations, but it's mostly talks about digital games. I think they do a lot of surveys and reflects what different people, different cultures and countries like in their games. So if you represent more of these themes and more of these settings, you're casting a wider net and you're capturing a bigger audience there. These kind of representations can have high impact or little to no impact in a game whatsoever. This makes adding representation to your game easy without really affecting the game. There's always this joke, if themes or settings are just pasted on, why can't we just paste the more unique one on? For mechanical representation, I want to talk about a little more of the assumptions that we make about certain mechanics. We always assume certain things like how a turn structure goes, what symbols mean, and what common colors mean, and we're wanting to have the set ideas in our community. But this is a very, I would say, American or European-centric idea. I mean, we're leaving out other countries such as Asia and Africa who have game designers and who need representation. An example was like Eastern cultures. When I always played games, always went counterclockwise compared to clockwise. So when I first started, it was something I had to learn and something I wasn't used to, especially in first games. So if your game relies on this kind of mechanic, it should be overtly said and not just assumed, or it can be localized to the region that you're selling to. Another example is I have slides that in China, the color for red and green are flipped compared to America. And the examples here are just from the stock market. So on the left side is American stocks, and it's all red, it's all bad. But in the flip side, for China, the red is good. So if you show kind of this kind of graph just from a visual representation, just looking at all that red, it could be good. But in our culture, it's bad. Another example is that other cultures read left to right, how you want to place your text, whether it's on the left or the right side. Another thing I want to talk, last thing for mechanical representation is there's always these Euro mechanics in tabletop games, really dry economic games versus like the American or the America trash games, which is the highly thematic games. But what about the other countries or other areas of the world? There's no like Asian game, there's no like African game. I mean, those obviously exist. We should represent them. And lastly, we already talked about why representation is important from a gender or from a background or just representation in general. But representation is also important if you want to capture a wide audience. If you capture a wide audience, and you capture more gamers. You bring more people into the community. You bring more consumers. You bring more people to play your games, buy your game, and to really enjoy those experiences that you put all that hard work into making. Another thing is there's a lot more recognition awards for games that have more representation. I mean, you just have to look in the tabletop RPG space, and last year's Spiel des Jahres. Diversity in games is new, and new is exciting. People like playing new games. It draws more people's eyes. They don't want to just play another the Mediterranean or another like pirate game. They want to play something that's new, that's exciting, and captures people's attention. So if you want to look into another way of representation that helps bring in a wider audience, if you want to look for another way to capture a wider audience, representation is a great way. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Tony. And last but not least, we have our next colleague, Jason Serrato. So Jason, take it away.
Thanks, Dave. I just want to say that was really fascinating to hear all three of you talk. It was really, I love the dynamic voices. And for my bit, I think I'm going to be a less high concept and a little bit more of a storytelling mode. And there was a lot of talking points that I hope we have a chance to talk about in the takeaway. But the first thing I want to hit on is basically context. Before I give my opinion, I just want to say specifically that my point of view with this representation topic in particular, I could speak at great length about representation in film, which was my original, my original career path. But in board games in particular, which I have not made any video games in my career. I've worked on a few, but never shipped anything. In board games in particular, my game Thug Life kind of flies in the face of some of the values and best practices that some of you have been discussing. And it's not because I disagree with those at all. It's just that my game initially came from, without me even knowing it, came from my personal background and almost kind of this unconscious expression. And because it was really an honest expression, and I believe it to have a lot of value, I never really took too much inventory on it. I just kind of plowed forward. It is a radical kind of diversity expression because it's almost entirely composed of non-white characters on the box and the rules, and it is subversive content. That was the intent. But along that journey, I did take on a lot of social norms, and we took on a lot of issues in the board game industry specifically that are completely thrown to the side. Because in particular with all gaming, the idea here is to, I believe Jessica talked on it extensively, the idea of engaging in a fantasy, right? Like you're trying to explore the other. Even in some abstract games, you can do this. And in my particular game, Thug Life, you take on the role of like a gang boss, right? That would seem at first impression to be like a very toxic kind of dark theme, and it most certainly is. That's kind of unavoidable. But along that journey, there is a lot of invitation to gamers who would never be able to explore this space. They have no context, they have no place even to go with it. But the thing I love about my game, and this is also an unconscious aspect of the design, is that it created this mirror of each person where in the context of this space that they're normally not allowed in, you're not allowed to have these kind of, black or brown fantasies if you're not black or brown. Seeing the way people reacted to this was utterly fascinating, almost kind of like a real-time psychological experiment. And it really made me, it was always kind of pins and needles for me when I took into a new room, whether I was demoing the game for a table of cops or like children, which is not appropriate for, I do not market to children. It was this kind of radical social experiment that I found myself on with almost no control. And along the way, I learned a lot of things about many of the topics that some of you were talking about today. But no question, I was the one making the waves, and I became the center of a pretty hot topic in the board game industry for a minute. And I became the subject of a documentary in a very toxic sort of community that did not want my game to exist for the mere fact that it was not what they were expecting. There was no white faces on the box. That was infuriating to a lot of people. And when they played the game, it didn't do a lot to, it just kind of leans in more and more to that kind of subversive theme. But I have kind of been the example of why a lot of these, why representation does matter. And I really do feel that when you see different faces, it creates different spaces in the imagination. Like we could all think about a young gamer who was heavily influenced by seeing themselves in a game, right? And even with board games, they're a little bit more of a literal representation because there's not a lot left to the theater of the mind, if you will. Whereas you're actually playing with tokens and physical props that are creating this world and creating the mechanics that you're interacting with them. And again, because I lean into this very heavily, my game makes you feel like you're a bad person. And it makes you really explore what I don't want to overstate this, really explore what that experience might kind of feel like. And I don't regret it for a second, but it's always interesting for me to see the fan reaction to it. And I'll be honest, I'm still processing a lot of this stuff. I'm still selling the game, and I'm still constantly interacting with a lot of people in the game space. So the other point that I wanted to bring up was this idea about what a game says about you. And ironically, I never thought that was, because this is my 7th game in the space. And this is the only one that really took on a personal sort of energy. And I didn't choose that. And it's ironic because that whole meme of like the thug life chose you. The game did kind of design itself along the way. No, not due in small part to my partner who did all the art. But at the same time, the game was kind of helping me work out some kind of cathartic stuff from my youth. So which kind of pushes me into another topic, which I mentioned earlier, is using your game as your voice. Because without even having too much forethought about the issue, I was kind of telling street stories of my youth. And I was kind of exploring spaces that, whether I like to believe it or not, we're still stuck in here somewhere. And when I play the game with others, they get that too. They have the opportunity, for good or for bad, they get to explore this dark space. And because it is kind of evened out with satire and art and comedy, it helps kind of lessen the dark edge. But I kind of made a poster child of a game that I would love other designers to explore without even realizing it at the time. So, and again, as I said, I'm still processing this. One of my greatest joys in my, this current version of my life is to play the game with others and to teach them how to play it, and then just to kind of sit back and watch how it plays out. So, yeah, I know that wasn't as I know that wasn't as high level as some of the other voices on this panel, but for me, I'm still kind of in the weeds with it, and it's still like a very serious endeavor for me. And when I've been on the other panels like this before and spoken with the designers, there's this. It's awesome to come with agendas, and it's awesome to come with mission statements, because all of you have fantastic goals when it comes to game design in particular. But one thing that I never let go of, it has to be a great game first. Doesn't matter how well-intentioned you are or how goal-oriented you are with the end goals of your game. It has to be a fun game. It has to grab people. It has to take them on a journey. And if it doesn't take them in that space, you fall into this kind of didactic role, suddenly you're designing against yourself. And that's something that I think is fundamental to all kinds of pursuits, not specifically to gaming or not exclusively to gaming, but I just think that needs to be said, because as much as I would love to support games that have a strong representational aspect to them, I won't play a bad game. And it's very hard for me, even if I view someone as an ally, I love their voice, I love the energy, and I even love, let's say, the visual look of the game, whether it's digital or analog. It has to be a good game. And as an avid gamer, as a gamer from, probably from the cradle of the grave, I cherish these experiences. This is my comfort food. So it can be very difficult for me to kind of struggle through a game if it doesn't grab me and keep me at the table.
Great. Thank you, Jason. I appreciate it. So all of our panelists have gone so far. I'd like to take the remaining time we have right now and just discuss some takeaways based on what we've talked about so far. So after listening to all of my colleagues' great insight and wisdom on their different professional areas, I'll start off the takeaways in the discussion here about virtue signaling, in which case, some individuals may preach that they want representation in games, or they're for a more diverse agenda, but they don't really take a lot of action steps towards doing that. So one of the things that I've tried to do in my own work, so that I am not just merely virtual signaling, is some key actions I can do. And one of them for me is to have more inclusive language in my rule books. And I talked about that before. But I wanted to ask the rest of the panelists here, what are some things that you would recommend that other designers or other gamers or just other people in the community can do in order to have greater representation in games? Like what are some action things that people can do right now in order to promote this agenda if they believe in representation in games? So I'll open it up to anyone that wants to answer that question.
I'll take that.
Go ahead, Trace.
And this is not something I initially signed up for, and I am speaking from the board game space. You got to put yourself out there. This panel is a perfect example of it. You can't be shy of your voice. You can't be shy of your opinion. A lot of people are not going to like what you say, no matter how you say it or who you are, what perspective you're coming from. But the best way for representation to happen isn't even in the products that we create. It's with our faces and our voices, making a stand, whether we're right or wrong, putting it out there. When people see us doing what we do, however we align ourselves, or however whatever our allies look like, it creates a dialogue that is no longer mainstream dialogue.
Thank you, Jason. So when you say put yourself out there, if we were to be more detailed, if you want to be like a tabletop designer, you actually have to start designing a tabletop game, even if it just happens to be a bad game, or if you just want to get ideas on paper. Is that what you're talking about?
I am, but I'm saying go to conventions, interact with gamers if you're in the board game space, like your physical presence. Or to fly around if cons ever come back. Being an active participant with the baby you've birthed, and putting yourself there in a physical space to not just share your creation, but to share yourself and to communicate transparently with an audience. Whether they love or hate your game, having that dialogue with them, and do a lot of listening. Do a lot of listening, especially in the design phase. Like, listen, you don't have to agree with them, but listen to what people are saying. And that is how you're going to create a space in their mind that says, that person was great. That was a great conversation. Now I can think about their game.
Thank you, Jason.
I want to actually echo what Jason is saying, and also add on to that, like, take the risk with the story that you're telling. Take that risk. There's a lot of stuff that's out there that's probably going to discourage you from doing it, because that's just the way the world is. And people discourage you from making the things that are true to who you are or to your story, as dark as it may be. That is part of your story, and that's part of who you are as a person. And it might not be the same as all the AAA games that are out there, but it's still important, and it still needs to be said. And that's how we change the type of content that's out there. That's how we change the different voices that are being told, and the stories that are being represented. But I think part of that too is, if you yourself are someone who, doesn't feel diverse and doesn't know how to help, because I have a lot of friends that are in that boat. They're like, I don't know how to help. I don't know how to be an ally. I don't know what you need from me. And I think, first of all, putting yourself out there, just like Jason said, to show that you are an ally as well, that you are willing to help, and then trying to grab those resources that you have available to you, that you might have that other people that are coming from a minority group don't have access to, and help facilitate some type of mentorship, help facilitate getting those people onto those projects, help facilitate those conversations, not for that person, but with that person. Bring them into as many of those projects as you can. And as somebody who is a minority and somebody who has these different types of stories to tell, really take that risk and meet those people, look for those people, because they're out there and they want to collaborate and they want to be a part of what you're doing. They just don't know how. And so try to invite people in.
Thank you, Dana.
Add to that also, I think what we pay attention to grows. So what you pay attention to will grow in the games, it will grow in the industry. And so keeping a focus on representation and inclusion in the game sphere is a really important thing to keep doing and a really actionable thing. And so some of this is big and some of it is small, and it's sort of like a choose your own adventure novel. If you are someone who identifies as an ally, amazing, you can help support games. You can be bumping and amplifying and promoting and doing active research on who's making things and putting the word out there. That's something that you can absolutely do, is just amplify voices who need amplification. Follow BIPOC creators on Twitter or whatever social media you're on. Make sure that the input that is coming in is representational of the world, as well as the output that you are creating. Look at your teams. Like, you can take a really concentrated look at the structures in your life. Who are the teams you are making work with? Who is, if you're at a point where people are purchasing your games, who's purchasing your games? Who are you reaching? Who is feeling seen by your games and who isn't? And what can you do to try to find some more balance within that? Another is to pay BIPOC playtesters. If there are voices that you want to be testing your game and providing feedback, then sometimes you're going to need to be able to put resources into that, to know that the people who can provide really valuable feedback on your games might not have the time or the energy to provide it. So providing other incentives so that you can have diverse voices in the making of your games is also a really actionable thing that can be done.
Thank you, Jessica.
Oh, one more thing, just in terms of what Jason and Dana were saying about being extroverted or putting yourself out there with your games. It's extremely helpful to be extroverted in this scene. But if you're not, then if you are an ally, you can help people who are not extroverted. We can find ways to support each other. And I think these systems don't always exist. So if you go looking for them, they may not be there. And that means that we have to create them. They're not going to get done. There isn't going to be change until this group of humans who is a part of this world right now makes it happen. So if you are noticing challenges, problems, obstacles, you can either start tackling them by yourself or find folks who can help you to do that. And you are in the right place to be doing all of that just by being here at this event. Okay, thanks.
So Jessica,
I just want to ask, sorry, to that real quick. I felt really alone in Utah as a Latino creator. Like I was like, okay, I don't know where to go. I don't know where to turn. And so I formed a group by myself. I was by myself. And then all of a sudden, these people just started coming. And all of a sudden I had these like allies and a community that I didn't know existed. And it was because I was willing to try. So please try. They're there, even though you don't see them.
And can I just say to Jessica's point, like, all my friends are weirdos. I'm a weirdo. I especially when I'm in a game designer, if I'm going to like a meetup or like there's all kinds of these events in Southern California where we like designers used to hang out with each other and do stuff. I love people on the spectrum. A lot of game designers are on the spectrum, and I love to find these introverts, these like crazy obsessed introverts who are all quiet and nobody's playing their game. I like to interact with them and bring them up and out. And if I need to make a scene at the table because I love their game, I'm not just making a scene. I'm actually legitimately reacting because I find it's the quiet, brooding, like super weirdos in the corner that always have the best games. So, and I love collaborating with them. I love bringing attention to them at cons. And of course I'm like their free extrovert for an hour. And I adore that role. And I think you can find a lot of synergy there. So yes, to Jessica's point, absolutely. If you're not an extrovert, if you are an extrovert, find an introverted game designer and make him the star of the show. You'll feel twice as good, as he does, quite frankly. It's a great experience if you've never done it before.
Or she or they.
Or she or they.
So one thing that got brought up before, Tony, I'll let you go in a moment, but so Jessica used the term BIPOC, which is BIPOC. Can someone take a moment and just define what that term means? Jessica, can you take a moment?
Um, yes, but I also want to make sure that I do it justice, so please feel free to correct me if I get any of this wrong. To the best of my knowledge, it is a larger grouping of people who are people of color, but also drawing attention. So there's a POC that we've seen around a lot, which is people of color, and so recently there's been an addition to that, which is the B and the I in the front, to recognize the fact that in particular in America, people who are Black and Indigenous have had a unique relationship to being a person of color in this community, in this country in particular. And so it really just says that yes, people of color deserve our attention, and very specifically, we need to make sure that we are taking particular care of Black and Indigenous voices right now. So that's my understanding of it. Again, please let me know if I'm missing anything or inaccurately representing that phrase.
I believe you got it. Thank you, Jessica. Tony, I cut you off. My apologies. Go ahead.
Oh, no, you're okay. I was just trying to echo like Dana's and Jason's points. So about the like if you want to help someone out there, you go and do the thing. But that's kind of how I always done things. When I moved here, I didn't find a design community. I wanted a design community, so I made my own. And then first few times, people might not show up, and people did not. And then eventually, you find your group, you find your tribe, or people who want to be there to do things with you, to support you, or for maybe even they need support from you. But regardless, but all that's to say is that there are people out there that want to do things. They just need that small little push, or that small little window, or small little gap to get them through, and they can start doing things. I never would have thought there would be a design community in Nashville, and in the last few years, I've been having it. As more people have been showing up, more people who are the majority in America, and then slowly more people of color, more minorities come out, and that's with steady progress that those people will come and feel accepted. And that's something we do have to keep in the back of our minds. That is, hey, this is not something that's going to be fixed overnight, or just in a year or so. This is something that's progress that has to be done. And as creators and as people in the community, we should be responsible for doing that.
So an important thing that Jason, Dana, and Tony brought up was the curation and formation of community. So for our fellow community members out there, other gamers or other designers, what tips do you have? And I'm specifically looking towards Dana and Tony, because you talked about your own communities. What tips do you have for people that want to start these communities and may not, immediately live in a large metropolitan area or anything else like that? What steps can people take now in order to form those?
I can start.
Yeah, go ahead, Dana.
So I am fortunate to have a really strong relationship with the Utah Film Commission, and they have been such an advocate and supporter of all of the different things that I do. And they really were a catalyst for me to start an organization. I got the support from that group to like really go for it, and I think that there are probably local organizations, whether it is, an entity that's part of your state government, which the Utah Film Commission is that, or something that's more of a local community, finding community members that maybe aren't necessarily gamers per se or designers per se, but first finding that a group of people who represent the same type of group that you're looking for. So for me, that was looking for a Latinx community. There happens to be a group of Latinx business owners and that type of a community. It's nothing to do with games. It's nothing to do specifically with design, but they knew other people, and they gave me some of the support that I needed to find the other people and to make the other connections, because they have a wider net than just me by myself, especially as somebody who moved here from Los Angeles. Like, I didn't grow up here. I didn't have that automatic network that I could tap into. So tapping into some of these other groups might help to get you going just a little bit, because all it takes is really, for me, it just took having one more person who was of Latinx artists to be like, yeah, let's do it. You know, and that's all it took, was one more person to really make me feel like there was a point in doing it. And I think that it's just finding that next person.
Thank you, Dana. And what about you, Tony? Do you have any insight on forming your own community?
Yeah, mine was the opposite actually. I just posted it out there on like social media. It's like, hey, I want to start a game design group. I'm looking for a space. Does anyone have a space for me? And then it was quiet for a long time. And then I try to find, meetups and go through there, find designers there. But I was really lucky and fortunate that a board game cafe opened up in Nashville called Game Point, and I'm so gracious to them. They host me. They put the word out there. And people come because they have a space for us to come. So that is an additional thing that we were talking about earlier, is what can we do to help representation? That's something we can do.
Great, thank you, Tony. So we're unfortunately at the end of our time here. Before we sign off, I'll let everyone share their one closing thought, and then please share how people can get in touch with you if they would like to learn more. So I'll go down the list. Jessica, your closing thought, and how can people get in touch with you?
Yeah, I guess my closing thought is just to remember that we each individually only have one life experience. And so games let us gather data points on other experiences, but together, just as a whole of humanity, then we have expertise on what it's like to be human. So keep adding your voice in whatever way you can to that massive amount of data that we are gathering about being human. And you can definitely be in touch with me. I'm on all the social media. My handle is @ICan'tCoan. It's a deep cut philosophy pun. DM me, I'll tell you all about it, way more than you ever want to know. That's ICANTKOAN. If you have any also specific questions about anything we talked about today, please consider me a resource in anything that I can be of use for. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Jessica. Tony, what is your closing thought, and how can people get in touch with you?
Yeah, I just want to say that representation in games extends more than just the typical things we think about. And that's something we should incorporate into our game design and to our audiences as well. On Twitter @TonyMakesGames. I'm trying to be pretty active there, and I do use my design on there. So if you're looking for a game design, you can follow me and use my ideas.
Great, thank you, Tony. Dana, what are your closing thoughts, and how can people get in touch with you?
So I think I just want to say that you matter. Your voice matters. The things that you create, they matter, and they are very much needed in this space. And please don't ever feel discouraged by the fact that you don't see yourself represented on all of the major games, but that can change, and that will change with us. You can contact me. I just started on my Twitter again. So you can contact me there, and it's @VR_specialist, or my website is danafaithware.com.
Great, thank you, Dana. And Jason, your closing thoughts, and where can people get in touch with you?
Well, Dana stole my talking point, so I'm just gonna go off the cuff. I'm gonna kind of revisit something I said before, and that's it. Listen a lot, but trust yourself. Don't let other people edit you, but listen to other voices. Let other people give you their points of view and absorb that. Just don't let them tell you how to fix it. That's a big thing. And also, it's okay to fail. Don't let it break you down if someone doesn't like your game, or if you make a bad game, or what you thought was representation backfires on you, and you think you're doing more harm than good. Learn, figure it out. Just be a finisher. Bring your whole effort to a conclusion, even if that's only a personal conclusion for you. Do that. Finish your thought, and close your circle.
Great, thank you, Jason. And you talked about Thug Life before. Where can people find more information about Thug Life?
You can find thuglifegame.com. Signed some Kickstarter overstock right now. Pretty happy to be still selling units. And also, if you want to see or hear more about me, you can check out the documentary Game Master. It's available on iTunes and Amazon. Super fun.
Great, thank you, Jason. And then rounding it off with me, my closing thought is that I don't know if you intended to come to this panel today or if you just found it randomly, but I'm really glad you're here. I think that a discussion always begins with taking the first step. And I congratulate all of you for taking your first step by watching this panel in its entirety today. So I appreciate that. My name's Dave Eng. My focus is on using games for teaching and learning and education. I write about it. I have a podcast, and I also have a YouTube channel. Find out more at universityxp.com. I want to thank my panelists again today. So thank you, Jessica. Thank you, Tony. Thank you, Dana. And thank you, Jason, for being here. We hope you learned a lot, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.
The next chapter in Firefly's classic real-time strategy series, Stronghold Warlords is the latest in a line of unique castle sim games. Developed by Firefly Studios, creators of the original Stronghold and Stronghold Crusader, Stronghold Warlords introduces new RTS mechanics, classic Stronghold units, and 4 unique regions. In Stronghold Warlords, players must first design, build, and manage a fully realised castle economy, before taking the fight to rival opponents lifted from the pages of history. But you won't be alone in the fights, with the addition of a completely new way to play Stronghold in the Warlord system. Players will besiege Great Khans, Imperial leaders, Shogun commanders and more as they grow their castle economy and construct new gunpowder-fueled siege weapons. Taking players from the jungles of Vietnam and the Mongolian steppe to the warring states of China and finally feudal Japan, this new setting is built into each aspect of our castle sim gameplay. Popularity with your subjects is influenced by a wider variety of factors than ever before. A granary full of rice, meat and vegetables might keep your peasants from revolting, but in order to raise taxes, an army, and get the most from your workers, they'll need more than just full bellies. Quality clothing and housing, temples, tea houses, medieval entertainment, and even torture devices all have a role to play in the continued happiness and obedience of your peasant population. Fail to stay on their good side and peasants will abandon the player, leaving you without farmers, blacksmiths, diplomats, and indeed soldiers with which to defend your keep. Introducing new cultures, mechanics, and historical detail to the series for the first time, Warlords is built around the central Warlord system, a grand strategy mechanic that allows players to recruit, upgrade, and command 8 unique warlords across the battlefield. Once under your command, either through force or diplomacy,
I serve a new master. My army is ready.
Each warlord boosts your strategic prowess with unique perks, characteristics, and upgradable abilities. Early on, players can boost their diplomacy and gold reserves with the help of the Crane Warlord, who also has a unique perk that boosts popularity within the castle. Later in the game, we might turn to more military-focused warlords, like the Tiger and Dragon. These more aggressive warlords can do everything from increasing melee damage and offering spiritual guidance, to growing your army with special units and even launching a full siege attack on the enemy. Utilize each warlord to boost your industry, fortify borders, forge weapons or launch a pincer attack, and you'll dominate the battlefield in no time. Each mission and multiplayer battle means a fresh set of warlords to command and new dynamics for every castle built.
With all the warlords in this region, we have the numbers to launch a single great assault on the castle.
To defend their castles, players will take command of Mongol hordes, Imperial warriors and samurai clansmen, as they prepare to besiege everything from Japanese castles to fortified Chinese cities. In addition to classic weapons like the Trebuchet and Mighty Siege Tower, Warlords also introduces gunpowder to the series for the first time. The Korean hwacha, rocket launchers, and fire oxen, inspired by Chinese siege warfare, are all options for players hoping to breach enemy walls and thin out an attacking siege force. When it comes to infantry, players will be able to recruit all new units including fire lancers, disciplined samurai, Mongolian bowmen, and heavily armoured imperial troops. Combine these with your siege weapons of choice and players will have all the tools they need to break enemy lines and defeat the enemy warlord. Whether you become the greatest lord through fear or admiration, military might or careful diplomacy, players will journey from 3rd century BC China and Vietnam all the way through to the rise of the Tokugawa shogunate and the coming of the Mongol Empire.